Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. My guest tonight is the Euchee and Comanche artist, Joe Dale Nevaquaya. Joe lives in central Oklahoma now, but he has lived in Marseille and Paris, and he and his brother Richard Whitman have a current exhibit at the Venice Biennale. Joe is the winner of the 1992 Diane Decora Memorial Award. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for coming to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us some more about this award that you got?
In 1992 was the first International Native Writers Conference. The writers from Alaska, the Arctic Circle, to the tip of South America gathered here at the university. And the writers, playwrights, dramatists, and each category produced a winner. And this was the first year, and the Diane Decora Memorial Award was presented to me for my first manuscript. And I was very pleased and honored to receive that.
Congratulations, it sounds like quite an honor. Now, you and your brother were raised with the Euchee language, and you're speakers of Euchee. But I understand that this is one of the languages in Oklahoma that really has very few fluent speakers. It's not widely used even by people in the Euchee tribe today. Can you tell us a little bit about that background and what it meant to be in that context with respect to your language?
Well, I can only speak for myself, and I don't presume to speak for my brother or the Euchee people or any other indigenous people. But having been raised in a household that where the Euchee language is spoke within the home itself, and then walking outside the front door to go with my playmates who were non-native and attending public school, there was quite a paradox, and it created a sense of dual realities for myself as a young man and then as a burgeoning artist, and hopefully now as a mature artist. And I think that talking about the lack of speakers of the language is that, again, I can only speak for myself. I attended public school, and the first act that the school administration did to me and my grandmother was they could pronounce the last name Nevaquaya, which is Euchee. So they just said, from here on out, your name is Joe Dale Tate. And in that moment, there was a very cavalier act, and that was one of the very first acts of that I remember as an assault upon me as a native person and a person who grew up with a native language. And so there's I don't know, did I answer your question?
Well, that sure tells us a lot about what it meant to be in that situation. Yeah, I've often thought that, I mean, I guess Indians in all tribes at one point, a lot of them right at the point of allotment were just sort of assigned names.
Yeah.
Anglo-sounding names that whoever was writing the list down, it just popped into their head, so that became your name. I've often thought that was extremely audacious, and what an incredible insult that was to people to say, you don't have much left at all and you don't even have your name left.
An actual assault,
Yeah, yes, right. Well, yeah, I think that very incident tells us a lot. One of the things I do when I have people on the show who are native speaker of their languages, just to give us kind of a way to start off and so people will have a chance to hear the language a little bit, I ask them to teach us a greeting in their language. Could you tell us how you would greet someone in the Euchee language?
Well, I could, but I won't. I choose not to. I reserve that right as a speaker of the native language to address only my fellow tribesperson. And I think I have nothing against that with anybody else of my tribal background who wish to offer that to a non-native person. But my own personal philosophy is that it goes back to the idea of like when I was growing up, and a lot of the non-native kids would ask me, "Are you Indian?" I'd say, "Well, yes." And they said, "Well, say something Indian to us." There were times when I would comply, and it got to a point where I would be saying something almost an insult to them in my language, because that to them it was just a sound as opposed to its content, and so.
So your game was your language was sort of reduced to a parlor game, or
exactly,
like cocktail chatter.
It became trivialized, and even today I only speak my language with my tribal people, and even then sometimes I don't.
Yeah. Well, the Wordpath show will certainly respect your attitude about that, and I do think it's important. You're not the first person I've run into who has that kind of attitude about their language, and I thought something we haven't brought out too much on the show before, so I thought it would be important to give you a chance to state that position.
Well, thank you for that.
So let me, it's kind of hard to know how to ask this because you were just talking about people offending you talking about your language, and I want to make sure I don't. But, and I'm kind of wanting to play devil's advocate, which I'm not always good at because I believe in what I believe in. You know, I don't like to give myself the voice of someone even more ignorant than myself. But here's what I'm getting at. A lot of people are not aware of the existence or the richness or the importance of Indian languages, and they figure there's also a huge movement in the last couple of decades. There's been a huge movement around the country that doesn't just relate to Indian languages, but all minority languages, which says, hey, we have to make sure everybody speaks English. English is important. It's our common bond. It makes us American. There's all this movement to do everything in English. And you are reluctant to use Euchee with me because I'm not Euchee, which I respect and appreciate. But I guess, pardon me for just putting this bluntly and ignorantly, you'll know what I'm getting at, and you know this isn't quite where I'm coming from, but if your language is a minority language and you don't choose to speak it with non-Euchees, I don't know how much you use it in your daily life, but I guess my question is kind of, what is the Euchee language good for? I know it's important to you, it's important in your life, but it might be hard for some people to understand how a language of such limited usage and that gets no respect in the general society can be so important to you. I guess my question is something like, what is the Euchee language good for? Why is the Euchee language important?
Okay, I think for myself, the Euchee language informs me of who I am and where I come from and hopefully where I'm going. Having come from the language, I always harken back of like stepping outside the front door of the house that I grew up in into, I guess you'd say, the dominant society language, the English language. Mm-hmm. It presented itself with different possibilities and different paradoxes. Mm-hmm. And so that was a tool, a sense of having two tools, you know, as opposed mm-hmm. to having no tools at all, mm-hmm. you know. So I think that for me, the Euchee language informs me who I am, places me where I'm at in the world, mm-hmm. Amongst the world peoples, and validates myself daily, spiritually, to know that I can address the weather, the climate, someone's sense of emotional state. Mm-hmm. Because the English language is very sparse. It's not as rich. You can tell a very simple anecdote in the Euchee language, and you can see all its human nuances, and hear all its human nuances. Then you try to translate that into the English story, and it loses everything. And all you've got is just a very dull, plain. I went shopping with Betty the other day, and she dropped a can of beets, you know, and then, you know, and that's as far as it goes. But within the language, the Euchee language, it becomes embellished with its humanness. And for myself, it informs me who I am, where I've come from, the people that struggled, who fought for land, language, life, culture. That's all wrapped up in the language. And I think it's very important that whatever language that you're born with, I mean, as far as like your blood-wise, I think it's very important that you go back and reclaim that language because it does inform you who you are, and gives you a wider sense of the world and where you fit in with it and your obligation to that world. I don't know if that answers your question.
It's very helpful. Do you actually? Well, for instance, I recently taped, we have never done a show that relates to the Euchee language in any way before, but it just so happens, in addition to doing this show tonight, I've recently taped a Euchee language class, which we'll be showing on a future show. And one of the things I noticed is this was just a small group of Euchee people. There was one non-Euchee there. Is that something that would bother you at all, that a non-Euchee was studying the language?
Yes and no, because like it's good to be understood. It's good to communicate. And on the other level, it's almost like an acculturation, which is like we've been fighting since day one, acculturation. So in that, it's a very strange paradox, you know, and I think that it's up to the individual who's teaching the language. It's their own personal dilemma, you know. And, well, yeah, I'd be honest, I do have problems with people that, non-native, non-Euchee people who are learning the language, because for me it's about acculturation. And I think that we do have an obligation to preserve the language in its form. And I think the language is to be used by the people themselves.
Very interesting. Now, of course, I introduced you mainly, well, I mentioned that you had gotten this writing award, but I introduced you originally as a visual artist. And I know you have some poetry you want to read for us tonight. Do you want to say a little bit maybe about, and bring language into this if it's relevant, about the relation between being a visual artist and being a word artist, a writer as well?
Well, again, it goes back to like growing up in a household with the language, because the Euchee language is so rich in all its nuances, and that to try to present it into like the English format, I begin to see all its surrealities, and I think I can see that in a lot of like the Latin American poets. Their sense and their sense of surreality always relates back to the land and the other, the sense of the other. And that is one of the biggest gifts, I think, that that was left to me as a legacy by our grandmother, in that she allowed us to speak English, you know, in the home and encouraged us to speak it. But inside the home, it was the Euchee language, because it was very important that we understand the complexity of our personal human existence. And so having those sensibilities instilled in me, like when I began to see myself as an artist, as a visual artist, as a poet, and I really don't see a difference between the two, you know, because poetry is visual, you know, and so that's how the language informed me as an artist. And I think I'm rambling. No, if I've answered your question.
Oh, I think so. I'm enjoying what you're saying. Not being an artist myself, I'm not sure if I'm catching the, you know, all the nuances that perhaps another artist would have understood. But I just think it's so interesting, because at first glance, people might think of poetry and visual art, for instance, as being very different. And your poetry is mostly in English, and so it's a bit of a subtle point, probably it is for me. I mean, you're educating me to make this connection between your Euchee language and your poetry and your visual art. It's interesting to me. I think it probably relates to something you said a little while ago when we were speaking. You said that language is informed by the land itself, and that the people are informed by the language. Did I get that right?
Yeah. I believe that.
Sounds like this is all wrapped up in some of these same concepts.
Yeah, I believe that. Well, first there was, you know, the earth, you know, and then the people were placed here, and to understand your place and time and where you're at, you became shaped by what your surroundings, your environment, and the language becomes the flow of the land, the flow of the river, the not to sound so new age-ish or anything, but it is informed by the environment, you know, and some people sort of like the northern plains, they're informed by, you know, their environment, the southwest, the southeast, the northwest, you know, the coastal peoples, the jungle peoples. I think all their languages are informed by the land, and so they in turn are informed as a people, and then their identity is informed from that as a collective and selective group that moves on, and then the artist differentiating itself out to speak personally. So it all goes back to the land, which in language, and they're all interconnected. So I think that for me, the visual and art, the poetics, they are interlinked, just like language, land, identity, tribal identity, artistic identity, they're all interlinked.
Very good. I think that helps me to understand better, too, about wanting to keep the language for your own people, because it is wrapped up with identity.
Yeah,
Right?
I'd like to go back to that. It's, I don't want to sound, like arrogant or egocentric or even selfish or even culturally racist about it. But there are some things that are intrinsically tied into the language and tied into the people. And I think language, ceremony, song, those are the things that are intrinsic to a people.
Okay. Now, I know you did bring some poetry. Would you like to share that with us now?
Sure.
We'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Most of my work is in English, but it comes from the profound sense of having grown up with the Euchee language and all its nuances. And well, it's called the Winter Dogs. The winter dogs. Autumn is the winter dog, spent and sleeping in the deep snow. He dreams his shadow is arced against the brittle stranger of moon. He gnarls at the frayed edges of this tundra night. The blacker dog stands guard amongst the skeletal beings of trees. He becomes the nuance of fear. He becomes the funeral shroud draped across a face of ashen and powdered askance. Everywhere is the horizon. Here is nowhere with a new name nightly. He, she, I, we await your long and arduous return to us here in eternity. He is awaiting your feral smell of blood and hair. She is awaiting your gnarled fingers hooked through the silver gills of the approaching rain. I am awaiting your return to enter me like a stab through this hollow and hardened heart, puncturing first and at once ripping and tearing into my meat, rotting in the midnight sun. The wind and trees cacophonous are a sarcophagus of whitened noise that mounts and beds us nightly. I am the face of unfaithfulness. You are the dim filament of memory. You are a famished bone bitten and chewed beyond recognition. The swaying and blackening hills that lie between us is but a brief attempt at time, a monolithic monument to my survival. There are clouds unfurling and floating between us now and the moon. There are geese and seasons hearken past the rivers and cities of night. Their underbellies undulate, whitened in their destination of flight. They will rise and rest in the highest breast of our southern sister. They will be dry and brittle leaves that will fall to this earth and be covered in the rime of first frost. Our silhouettes will appear in the eternal window of winter. I with drink in hand, he with the eternal ponderance of loss and separation, she with the new litter that clamors and whimpers in the darkness of her teats. Our faces turned towards the window that never, ever sleeps.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And it certainly is rich with images of the earth and of the place that you came from.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Do you think, by the way, that do you feel that there is a difference between native and non-native poetry?
Maybe in spirit.
Can you explain that a little?
Okay. For instance, there are a lot of non-natives, New Age poets who do a lot of writing. They call themselves shamanistic poets who evoke the spirit of the land, and at the same time, on this other hand, are like making marketing, all about marketing, money, you know. On that level, I think there's a great difference there, you know. And for myself, when I first began to consider myself as an artist, I called myself native artist. But I think I've transcended onto another level as being the artist, an artist, not the artist, but an artist, you know. And I think it's very important that as human beings that we go to that level, because I think once we get on that level, or strive towards that level, then we begin to peel back the layers that separate us from each other as human beings, and not only as human beings, but as beings from the land, the air, the water, the other, you know, and then seeing ourselves as others.
Right. It's one of the interesting dichotomies of human life. I think it's so important to have your own identity, and it's equally important to make a connection with other people and other identities.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. That makes me wonder, are there any non-Indian poets that you do feel a connection with, that, you know, not the type that are out marketing the shamanistic approach, but people that you really feel some connection with, really where they are coming from, even though they're non-Euchee?
Of course, my favorite poet is, I'm forgetting his name, Pablo Neruda. I love the Latin writers. Their voices are so full of the land, the ocean, the flora, the fauna, the sexuality of being human.
Right.
Maybe not even on a sexual level, but the sexuality of being alive, being human, being sensual with themselves, with the earth, with the people around them. Oh, geez, I'm drawing a blank on other poets.
I know one that comes to my mind that strikes me as similar, but we'll see if you think so, is Garcia Lorca, Spanish poet.
Yes.
Yeah,
I love
he's full of a kind of honest earthiness, I think, and a lot of sexuality and sense of the place. Great rhythms, too.
Geez, I'm drawing a blank on other poets and other writers right now. Yeah. But yeah, I'm sure there are many.
Yeah.
You know, I read everything. I try to read everything. I read everything from the TV guide to the dictionary to the atlas to Italian tourist language books to everything. You know, I don't try to limit myself to anything. If it's there, I'll pick it up and I'll read it. You know, so I'm sure I've read some very favorite ones.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your perspectives on language and art and poetry, Joe. It's nice to get to know you a little better as we prepared for this show, and I really appreciate so many of the points that you had to make.
Thank you. It was painless after all.
Well, thank you very much for coming on with us.
Okay.
And join us next time on Wordpath. Boomer Sooner Contest, sponsored by the Wordpath Show. Almost everyone has heard the OU fight song Boomer Sooner. It was even played as wake-up music for the astronauts in space once. What could be more Oklahoman? What could be more appropriate to be done in Oklahoma Indian languages? Wordpath is sponsoring a contest to come up with new words for Boomer Sooner in an Indian language. The English words are as follows. Boomer Sooner, Boomer Sooner, Boomer Sooner, Boomer Sooner. I'm a Sooner born and a Sooner bred, and when I die I'll be a Sooner dead. Raw Oklahoma, Raw Oklahoma, Raw Oklahoma, OKU. Verse 2, almost the same, but it begins Oklahoma, 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 and then continues as the first verse did. Now, a judging panel will be put together from the Wordpath crew and Indian community leaders. The winning entrant will be invited to appear on the Wordpath show and perform their entry. Prize money of $100 has been offered for the best effort. Deadline for entries is August 24th, 1999. The complete contest rules follow. Wordpath Boomer Sooner contest rules. All entries must consist of the following: name, address, and telephone contact number of the entrant. Tape of Boomer Sooner, 1 or 2 verses, in an Indian language and identification of the language. Written version in the Indian language and English translation. A signed statement that the lyrics are the original creation of the entrant and that the Wordpath show has permission to play and display the entry on the air if it is chosen as a winner. 2, the lyrics must be in a Native American Indian language of any of the tribes headquartered in Oklahoma. Lyrics need not be a translation of the English words, but should suggest a fight song, mentioning pride, the desire to win, support for the team, something like that. Lyrics will be checked with a native speaker of the language for fluency and for accuracy of the translation. Lyrics will be judged for singability, so keeping at least some repetition as in the English original is advised. They will also be judged for positive spirit and authenticity of the language. Number 3, send entries to Wordpath Boomer Sooner Contest, 1506 Barclay Street, Norman, Oklahoma, 73071. Number 4, all entries must be postmarked by August 24th, 1999. Number 5, the tune to Boomer Sooner is in the public domain, so it's not copyrighted or copyrightable, but the lyrics submitted will remain the property of the entrant. Number 6, materials will not be returned unless sufficient return postage is included with the entry. Number 7, one prize of $100 will be awarded by our panel of judges, but the judges reserve the right not to award a prize if the number or quality of entries is low. Number 8, this contest is open to all Oklahoma residents. If you missed any part of this or would like a written copy of these official rules for the Boomer Sooner contest, call the Intertribal Wordpath Society at 447-6103 or write to the address previously mentioned, Intertribal Wordpath Society, 1506 Barclay Street, Norman, Oklahoma, 73071. Good luck.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita.